young pilot saved a millionaire woman from a plane crash. Days later, love found them. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. The storm had rolled in faster than expected. The night sky was split by jagged streaks of lightning, and thunder chased the small private jet through the darkness. Inside the cockpit, a young pilot gripped the controls, sweat dripping down his temple, jaw locked with focus. He was only 27, not yet a captain on commercial routes, but tonight, he was the only one standing between life and death. Behind him in the cabin sat a handful of passengers, but one stood out, a woman in her early 30s, poised, elegant, her diamond earrings flashing whenever lightning struck the windows. She was the daughter of a powerful business dynasty, though to the pilot, she was simply another life he had sworn to protect. A sudden jolt shook the aircraft, tossing drinks and luggage into the aisle. The right engine had failed. Warning alarms screamed through the cockpit. Oxygen masks dropped down in the cabin. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom, steady despite the chaos. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your pilot speaking. We are experiencing severe technical difficulties. Please remain calm and fasten your seatbelts. I will do everything I can to keep you safe." His words carried a quiet authority that steadied panicked hearts. Yet in his own chest, his heart pounded like a drum. He had trained for emergencies, but theory in the classroom was nothing compared to this. A storm tearing the sky apart, one engine gone, altitude dropping too fast. The millionaire woman clutched the armrest, knuckles white. For the first time in her life, money, power, and influence meant nothing. She was entirely in the hands of a man she had never noticed before, a man in a modest pilot's uniform, whose name she barely remembered from the boarding introduction. The aircraft lurched again. Panels rattled. Lights flickered. The pilot whispered under his breath, almost like a prayer, then made his decision. He could not save the plane completely, but maybe, just maybe, he could save the people inside. He pulled back the yoke, fighting the storm with all his strength. The radio hissed with static as he shouted a distress call. Coordinates rattled out with a trembling voice. No clear answer came back. Only broken words, drowned by thunder. The plane's nose dipped. Screams echoed from the cabin. The pilot's knuckles turned white on the controls. "Hold together. Just hold together," he muttered. Then came the sound no pilot ever wants to hear, a violent explosion from the failing engine, followed by fire streaking across the wing. The woman's eyes widened as she pressed against the window, her reflection caught between terror and disbelief. In that instant, with death closing in, two lives from opposite worlds were about to collide. The young man with nothing but determination in his veins, and the woman who had everything money could buy yet nothing money could save until this night, when fate set them on the same burning path through the storm. Flames licked across the right wing, painting the stormy night with a terrifying glow. The young pilot's eyes narrowed. His training screamed at him that the aircraft was losing altitude too quickly, but there was no room for panic. He slammed the emergency lever, cutting off fuel to the failing engine, praying it would prevent the fire from spreading. "Brace for impact!" His voice rang through the cabin, steady and commanding, as if his calm could shield the passengers from what was about to come. The woman in the cabin, the millionaire, who had never once feared the ground beneath her feet, now clutched the seatbelt across her chest like it was her final thread of life. The world outside the windows was a blur of rain and lightning, a relentless reminder that money could not buy safety in the skies. With his teeth clenched, the pilot guided the crippled jet through sheets of rain. He spotted a dark stretch of land below, perhaps a clearing, maybe just a shadow. He did not have the luxury to choose. He angled the plane down, reducing speed as much as the remaining engine would allow. The ground rushed toward them. Passengers screamed, glass cracked, luggage flew like missiles. The woman squeezed her eyes shut, whispering a silent prayer. Then impact. The aircraft slammed into the ground with a deafening crash. Metal screeched, wings tore through trees, sparks erupted into fire. The force hurled the woman forward, but her seatbelt held. Pain shot through her shoulder, and smoke filled her lungs. Somehow, against all odds, The fuselage remained mostly intact. Groaning in pain, the pilot released his harness and staggered into the cabin. "Everyone, move! We need to get out, now!" The woman coughed violently, struggling to rise. Flames spread along the broken wing. The air reeked of fuel. She felt hands gripping her arm, his hands, rough and strong, pulling her up. "Can you walk?" he asked, his face streaked with sweat and soot. She nodded weakly, though her knees trembled. Without hesitation, he threw her arm over his shoulder, bearing her weight as if it cost him nothing. Together they pushed through the wreckage. Sparks hissed. Metal groaned above them. A section of the cabin ceiling collapsed behind them with a roar, showering them in debris. He shielded her with his own body, teeth gritting against the pain. "Keep moving!" Outside, the storm still raged. The clearing was nothing but a patch of mud and broken trees, lit by the orange glow of burning wreckage. Rain hissed against the flames, but it was not enough to put them out. The pilot half dragged, half carried her away from the wreck. He set her down against the trunk of a fallen tree, then rushed back toward the cabin door. "Wait, what are you doing?" she cried out, her voice hoarse. "There are others inside," he answered, without turning back. Before she could protest, he disappeared into the smoke. Seconds stretched into eternities. Her heart pounded, torn between terror and disbelief that someone could risk his life again when he had barely escaped with it once. Then he emerged, carrying a child clinging to his neck, followed by another passenger limping at his side. He set them down beside her, his chest heaving, eyes burning with determination. One by one, he pulled survivors from the wreckage until the last passenger stumbled free. Finally, flames engulfed the cabin entirely, exploding with a blast that shook the ground. The survivors huddled together in the rain, coughing, bleeding, alive. The woman looked at the young pilot, his uniform torn, his arm bleeding, his face smeared with soot and rain. In that moment, he did not look like a man defined by rank or wealth. He looked like a leader, the kind of man who bore the weight of strangers' lives without hesitation. For the first time, her eyes lingered on him, not with fear, but with awe. Rain continued to fall over the clearing, hissing as it struck the burning wreckage. The forest around them was silent except for the crackle of fire and the gasps of the survivors. Every breath carried the sharp taste of smoke. The young pilot knelt beside the woman he had pulled from the cabin. Her hair clung to her face, damp with rain and sweat, and a gash on her forehead bled down her temple. He tore a strip from his own sleeve and pressed it gently against her wound. "You are hurt," he said, his voice low but steady. She shook her head, though her hands trembled. "I am alive because of you. That is all that matters." For a brief moment, their eyes locked. In the reflection of the fire, she saw not just the man who had saved her life, but someone who carried a quiet strength that no wealth could imitate. The pilot broke the silence, scanning the tree line. "We cannot stay close to the wreck. The fuel could ignite again. We need shelter." The passengers, frightened and disoriented, turned to him instinctively. None of them questioned his authority now. He led them away from the flames into the darkness of the forest, guiding them with nothing but a small emergency flashlight. Mud clung to their shoes. Branches whipped against their arms. The storm raged above, but within the group a fragile order formed because they had a leader who refused to falter. At last they reached a cluster of tall pines that offered some cover from the rain. The pilot helped the woman sit against the trunk of a tree. Her designer blouse was torn, her jewelry smeared with soot, yet her presence remained unshaken. She watched him as he moved among the survivors, checking injuries, sharing calm words. When he returned to her side, she asked quietly, "What about you?" "Your arm is bleeding." He glanced at the wound, a deep scrape from flying debris, and shrugged. "It is nothing. Others needed help first." She studied him, astonished by his matter-of-fact tone. In her world, people measured value in money and titles. Here, in the heart of a burning wilderness, value was measured in courage. The hours dragged by as they waited for rescue. The storm eventually softened to a steady drizzle. In the darkness, the pilot removed his jacket and draped it over the woman's shoulders. She flinched at the unexpected warmth. "You should keep it," she said. "You are shivering," he replied. "You need it more than I do." "Oh." She pulled the jacket closer, inhaling the faint scent of smoke and rain clinging to the fabric. It was the first gesture of protection in her life that was given without calculation, without expectation. When fatigue pressed heavy on the survivors, the woman whispered, "Do you think anyone will find us?" The pilot's eyes lifted to the sky, where the clouds slowly began to break apart, revealing faint stars. "They will, but until then, I will not let anything happen to you." Her chest tightened at the certainty in his voice. She had always been surrounded by men who spoke in deals, negotiations, and empty promises. Tonight, one sentence spoken by a young pilot carried more weight than every contract she had ever signed. As dawn crept over the horizon, painting the forest in gray light, the survivors stirred. The wreck still smoked in the distance. The woman, still wrapped in his jacket, watched the pilot move tirelessly, helping the weak, keeping the group together. For the first time, she realized her heart was beating not just from fear of survival, but from something new, something fragile, that had begun to grow in the ashes of the storm. The first light of morning spread across the forest, brushing the survivors with pale gold. Smoke from the wreck drifted upward, curling into the sky like a signal fire. The young pilot stood at the edge of the clearing, scanning the horizon. His uniform was torn, his arm bandaged with makeshift cloth, but his posture remained unshaken. Then, faint at first, came the sound of distant engines. The survivors stirred, hope rushing through their veins. The woman pressed her hand against her chest, breath-catching. The pilot lifted his head, eyes sharp. "Helicopters," he said firmly. "They found us." Minutes later, the trees trembled as two rescue helicopters descended into the clearing. Wind whipped the ground, scattering leaves and ash. Searchlights swept across the survivors. Rescue workers rushed forward, shouting orders, helping the injured. The woman rose to her feet with the pilot's steadying hand. She was still wrapped in his jacket, still marked by smoke and dirt. But the moment the first rescuer recognized her face, everything changed. "It is her!" a man exclaimed. "It is the heiress! She is alive!" Voices rippled through the rescue team. Cameras flashed as journalists, who had followed the rescue convoy, raised their lenses. Reporters shouted questions, each one louder than the last. "Miss, how did you survive the crash? Who is the man beside you? Did he save your life?" The woman blinked against the sudden barrage, overwhelmed. She had spent her life in the public eye, but never had the weight of attention felt this heavy. She turned instinctively to the pilot, the one steady presence in the storm of voices. He stepped back, suddenly aware of the divide opening between them. A moment ago, she had been just another survivor, a woman who clung to his arm in the rain. Now she was revealed as the daughter of one of the wealthiest families in the country, the face that adorned business magazines and financial news. The rescuers guided her toward a stretcher, but she shook her head. "I am fine. Help the others first." "Ah." The pilot's eyes flickered with quiet admiration, but he kept his distance. Cameras kept flashing. Microphones were shoved forward. And slowly, painfully, he realized that her world was not his. One journalist pointed at him. "Sir, what is your name? Are you the pilot who brought down the plane?" He opened his mouth, then closed it. Around him, the survivors began to speak for him. "He saved us all. He pulled us out of the wreckage. He went back inside for the child." "Oh." The crowd surged closer, but the pilot shook his head. "I only did my duty, nothing more." Yet even as he spoke, he felt the chasm between himself and the woman grow wider. She was whisked away by medics, surrounded by flashing cameras and urgent voices. He stood apart, mud on his boots, blood still seeping through the cloth on his arm. For one night, they had shared the same world of fire and fear, leaning on each other as equals. But now, daylight revealed the truth. She was a woman of untouchable wealth, a figure of power. He was just a young man in a torn uniform, nameless in the headlines except as a pilot. Their eyes met once more across the chaos. She gave a small, silent nod, her lips trembling as if she wanted to speak. But the noise swallowed her words, and in the next moment, she was lifted into the helicopter, cameras still flashing around her. The rotors thundered, lifting her away into the sky. The pilot remained on the ground, his jacket still draped around her shoulders, carried into a world that did not belong to him. For the first time since the night began, he felt the ache of distance not in miles, but in class, in status, in everything money could build between two hearts. News of the crash spread like wildfire. By the time the helicopters landed at the city hospital, the world already knew the heiress had survived. Headlines screamed across television screens and online articles, "Daughter of aviation empire saved in fiery crash." Photographs of her being carried from the wreckage appeared everywhere, and in nearly every frame, a figure stood close by a young pilot with torn clothes and soot on his face. At first, the story seemed simple. The hero pilot saved lives. But soon, whispers began to twist the narrative. In the lobby of the hospital, reporters swarmed. Did he do it for recognition? They asked. Was he chasing fame or worse fortune? Her family arrived swiftly, their presence as commanding as an army. The woman's father, a stern man whose empire had been built on steel and sky, stared at the pilot with cold suspicion. "You were at the controls when the aircraft went down?" he demanded. The pilot stood tall, though his arm still throbbed beneath the rough bandage. "Yes, sir. I did everything I could to land safely. I tried to save everyone." "Or did you see an opportunity?" the father pressed, his voice sharp enough to cut glass. "You cling to my daughter, you step into the spotlight, and now the world is calling you a hero. Convenient, is it not?" The accusation struck harder than the crash itself. The pilot's jaw tightened, but he did not argue. He knew the truth, that he had acted only from duty. But in this gleaming hospital, surrounded by wealth and power, his words felt small. The heiress stepped forward, fire flashing in her eyes. "Father, that is not fair. He saved us. He saved me." But her defense only deepened the suspicion. In the eyes of her family, her gratitude looked dangerously close to affection. Soon the tabloids added fuel. "Romance in the wreckage?" headlines teased, accompanied by grainy photographs of the pilot draping his jacket over her shoulders. Social media erupted with speculation. Some called it a love story. Others called it manipulation. The pilot retreated from the noise. He refused interviews, avoided cameras, and slipped quietly back to his modest apartment on the edge of the city. The world might twist his motives, but he would not let them strip him of his dignity. Still, the woman could not stay away. Days later, she arrived at his door, her presence a striking contrast against the cracked paint and narrow hallways. She found him seated at a small table, textbooks and flight manuals spread before him. His injured arm rested in a sling, yet his eyes still burned with determination. "You are still studying?" she asked softly. "I have to," he replied. "If I stop now, everything I worked for will be wasted. My dream is to fly again, not for glory, not for wealth, but because it is who I am." Her throat tightened. She had seen men chase her family's money all her life. This was different. He chased the sky itself, something no inheritance could buy. But outside that small apartment, the world's judgment only grew louder. Her family warned her to cut ties. Her father's words echoed, "This man is dangerous to your reputation. He will never belong to our world." For the first time since the crash, the woman felt torn between two forces, her family's power and the quiet truth in the eyes of the man who had risked everything for her. Rain drizzled outside the narrow window of the pilot's apartment. The city lights blurred in the droplets, casting soft glows across the small room where he sat surrounded by open manuals and scattered notes. His slinged arm rested heavily against the table, but his eyes never left the lines of technical diagrams. The knock at the door startled him. When he opened it, she stood there dressed simply, without the armor of luxury that usually shielded her. Her eyes carried both defiance and vulnerability. "You should not be here," he said quietly, though his voice betrayed the flicker of relief at seeing her. "I had to see you," she answered, stepping past him into the room. She looked around at the worn furniture, the peeling wallpaper, the textbooks stacked high like fortresses. Her gaze softened. "This is your world?" "It is," he admitted. "It is not much, but it is mine." She touched the corner of a manual, its pages bent from years of use. "You study every night, even after what you went through?" "I do," he replied. "Dreams do not wait for wounds to heal." Her throat tightened. She had grown up in mansions, surrounded by everything money could provide. Yet here was a man clinging to his dream with nothing but grit and persistence. It stirred something inside her. She had never known respect, admiration, and something deeper she dared not name. He noticed her shiver, the damp from the rain clinging to her thin coat. Without hesitation, he reached for a blanket draped over a chair and placed it around her shoulders. Their eyes met, and for a long moment, silence filled the room, heavier than words. "I keep hearing what they say," she whispered, "that you want something from me, that you only saved me for attention. But when I look at you, I know it is not true." He looked away, jaw tight. "The world will always believe what it wants. I cannot fight every voice." But you fought for me," she said, her voice trembling. "Out there, in that storm, you did not hesitate. You risked everything, even your own life." "Why?" The question hung between them. Slowly, he answered, his voice raw. "Because it was the right thing to do. Because no life is worth less than another." Her eyes filled with tears. No one in her world had ever spoken so simply, so truthfully. She reached out, taking his injured hand gently in hers. For the first time since the crash, the walls between them seemed to crumble. The air grew still. Outside, the rain eased into silence. In the dim light of the small apartment, they sat together, her hand resting in his, her heart racing with a warmth that felt like both safety and danger. For the woman who had known only calculated alliances and hollow promises, this was something new, an intimacy born not of wealth or power, but of trust, sacrifice, and the quiet courage of a man who asked for nothing in return. And for the pilot, who had spent his life overlooked and underestimated, this was the first time he felt seen, not as a uniform, not as a survivor, but as himself. The fragile peace between them did not last long. Just as the storm outside had passed only to leave wreckage behind, a new storm was brewing in the city, one made of suspicion, politics, and greed. News outlets that once called him a hero began to change their tone. Investigations into the crash uncovered disturbing details. A reporter on television announced, "Preliminary findings suggest the possibility of sabotage. Officials have not ruled out the involvement of the pilot." His name, once spoken with gratitude, was now tangled with doubt. Headlines questioned his competence. Commentators speculated that he might have tampered with the plane to stage his own heroism. The woman's family seized on the narrative. Her father summoned her into his office, the air thick with authority. "You see," he said, slamming the report onto the desk. "I warned you. This man is not a savior. He is a liability. The board already whispers that he caused the crash. If we do not cut ties, our entire company will suffer." Her heart ached at the words. "Father, he would never do such a thing. He nearly died saving us." I saw the fire in his eyes. That was not a man seeking fame. That was a man fighting for our lives. But her father's expression did not soften. "The world does not care what you saw. They care what they can prove. And right now, every finger points at him." Meanwhile, the pilot faced investigators who grilled him with relentless questions. "Why were you the only one in the cockpit? Did you disable the safety system? Why were you so quick to the cameras after the crash?" He clenched his fists, his voice steady but heavy with frustration. "I did my duty. I saved who I could. Nothing more." But his words were drowned beneath suspicion. His flight license was suspended pending further review. Without it, his dream, the very sky itself, was slipping from his grasp. When the woman learned of his suspension, she rushed to his side. She found him sitting in silence, his manuals closed, his eyes dark with a grief deeper than pain. "They want to make me the villain," he said quietly. "They want to erase everything I did that night." She knelt beside him, taking his hand. "Then let me stand with you." "I will not let them destroy your name." He shook his head. "You do not understand. Standing with me will cost you everything, your family, your reputation, the empire you were born to protect." "Oh," her voice trembled, but her resolve did not. "What use is an empire built on lies if I cannot stand for truth?" Their words hung in the stillness. For the first time, the line between their worlds seemed not just wide, but dangerous. Forces larger than either of them were moving, and he had become their target. Outside, thunder rolled faintly once more, as if the sky itself knew another storm was coming. The investigation reached its climax in a crowded press conference. Reporters filled the hall, cameras blinking like restless eyes. The pilot sat alone at the front, his uniform jacket clean but worn, his suspended license weighing on him like chains. Murmurs spread through the room, many convinced that he would be branded guilty before the day was over. Then the doors opened, and she walked in. The heiress, dressed with quiet dignity, stepped onto the stage beside him. The crowd erupted with questions, but she raised her hand, and silence followed. "I am here to speak the truth," she began, her voice strong, steady. "This man did not sabotage the aircraft. He did not endanger lives for attention. He risked his life for mine. He pulled passengers from the wreckage with his bare hands. He shielded us from fire. Without him, I would not be standing here." Reporters shouted over one another. "Do you have proof?" one demanded. Her eyes flashed. "Yes. The data shows tampering with the fuel line, but not by his hand. Evidence recovered from the wreck points to a subcontractor tied to a rival company, someone with every motive to see our plane fall. He was made the scapegoat because it was easier to blame a young pilot than to expose powerful enemies." Gasps rippled through the hall. Officials shuffled papers, faces pale as the truth spread faster than the lies had. The rival's name was soon revealed, their scheme exposed, their power shattered in the glare of truth. The pilot sat in stunned silence as the tide turned. Reporters now aimed their cameras not with suspicion, but with respect. Words like hero returned to the headlines, this time without question. Yet in that moment, what struck him most was not the redemption of his name, but the woman who had stood before the world to defend him, risking her empire, her reputation, even her family's approval. She reached for his hand, intertwining her fingers with his in front of the cameras. Her voice softened, though the microphones caught every word. "He did not need to prove his worth to me. He already did that the night he chose to save lives instead of his own." The room erupted in flashes and voices, but neither of them noticed. For a brief moment, it was only the two of them, bound by fire, truth, and a courage that no accusation could erase. The fallout from the press conference was swift and decisive. The rival company that had orchestrated the sabotage collapsed under investigation. Executives were arrested, their empire crumbling in the public eye. Justice, long hidden behind lies, had finally broken through. The young pilot's name was cleared in every headline. His license was reinstated, and his bravery was officially commended by aviation authorities. For many, he had become the symbol of integrity in an age where power often overshadowed truth. Yet when he stood before the flashing cameras once again, he spoke with the same humility that had carried him through the storm. "I am no hero," he said firmly. "I am a man who did his duty. Lives were at stake, and I did what I could. I asked for no reward, only the chance to keep flying." The public adored him for it. But beyond the applause, beyond the headlines, the moment that mattered most happened away from the noise. On a quiet evening weeks later, the woman found him back in the cockpit of a small training aircraft. The sun was setting, washing the sky in shades of crimson and gold. She stepped onto the tarmac, her heels clicking against the pavement, but her presence softer than ever. "You are flying again," she said, her smile gentle. He turned toward her, his eyes lifting from the controls. "Yes." The sky never stopped calling. She walked closer, her gaze steady. "And what about us? Will you keep running from me because of the world between us?" His breath caught. For so long, he had believed that distance of wealth, of class, of status would forever separate them. But standing there, with the woman who had faced the world to defend him, he realized that those barriers no longer held power. He stepped down from the cockpit, closing the space between them. "I was never running from you," he said quietly. "I was running from the fear that I could never belong in your world." Her voice trembled, but her words carried certainty. "Then let us create a new world, one where worth is not measured in money or status, but in truth and courage. You showed me that night in the storm that love is not built on what we own, but on what we are willing to give." The weight of her words settled deep in his chest. Slowly, he reached for her hand. She did not hesitate. Their fingers intertwined, and the setting sun bathed them in light, as if sealing a promise no paper contract could ever write. From that day forward, their love was no longer a fragile secret born in fire. It became a vow carried openly, defended against doubt, and proven in action. Her family, once resistant, could no longer deny the man who had saved their daughter and stood unbroken under false accusations. In time, even her father, though stern, extended his hand with a respect that words could not disguise. The young pilot never asked for riches. He never sought glory. But he gained something greater, the trust of the woman who had everything, and the chance to fly with her beside him. On their first flight together after the storm, she sat in the co-pilot's seat, her eyes sparkling with both fear and wonder. He smiled, steady at the controls, and said, "Ready?" She nodded, her hand resting over his. "Always." The engines roared to life, and the plane lifted into the open sky. The world below shrank, the horizon stretched wide, and together they soared, not bound by class, not bound by doubt, but carried by a love that had risen from the wreckage stronger than the storm.